Hi everybody, trying a new format now that I've actually done a little bit of editing under my belt and kind of know how to make this work. But I've set a new goal for myself. There are 7 different regionals in Victoria. I want to go to all 7 of them, and for each of them, I want to play a different deck. And I thought it'd be fun to kind of do a full deck profile, have a game afterwards, and then kind of talk about like the pros and cons of each of the decks that I played. So, without further ado, I'm going to do this kind of MBT style if anybody is familiar with it. But I'm going to talk a little bit about the history of Chaos Arc and Mono Ice, and then I'm going to go into kind of the card by card, followed by a game, and then at the end I'll talk about some pros and cons and my thought about the deck in the metagame. Pretty simple stuff, pretty exciting. So, Chaos Arc and Mono Ice haven't really been together. There hasn't been a lot of a reason to. Chaos Arc really took off in around the end of Opus 19 when people realized that it wasn't just a meme to throw 3 really expensive dark cards, or 6 really expensive dark cards in a deck together, even when the synergy was really obvious. And Mono Ice was kind of one of those things that started off really, really strong, kind of in the early game history, all the way through about, I want to say the printing of Sephiroth, but it really started falling off as they stopped printing so many discard effects. But it got an unbelievable push in the last couple of sets between the printing of Emina in Opus 22 and Kate Sith in Opus 23 as a legend. There really is a lot of reasons to be playing Mono Ice right now, and there's a lot of really strong cards that have been printed into Mono Ice. So now we have this really interesting spot where in the last couple of sets they printed a lot of random Mono Ice summon or Ice summon support, and it maybe is worth it to give Chaos Arc a try. Originally I gave this list a try based on the Steve D profile, but I found a lot of things I didn't like in that list over time, and I ended up coming to this list. So let's talk a little bit about the card by card. One copy of Sarah Mobius. This was a really late edition. You kind of get into a state in this deck where once you get ahead, you do a really good job of staying ahead. And Sarah Mobius is a really strong and cheap forward to put next to a Chaos to help protect the Chaos to win the rest of the game. The Heart of the Soul of the deck, 3 copies of Len. This card is fantastic. It's maybe my favorite card in the entire set. I would love to get a playset of this card in full art. Currently I just have 1 foil and 2 non-foils. So at the beginning of your attack phase during each of your turns, with the top card of your deck from the game, you can cast it any time this turn. So you get a bit of Impulse Draw is the term for anybody that plays Magic. And for 1, you can remove it from the game, and you get to basically Man in Black a summon. You remove it from the game, you can cast it any time for the rest of the game as though you could normally cast it. This is incredible. She kind of functions as a simultaneous draw engine and a one-time Lulu at any point over the course of the game, while being really cheap. If you think about what she kind of does, you can play her, go to combat, get a free draw from the Impulse Draw, and then you can remove her from the game to get back something like an Arc or a free cast Shiva. And she's almost like a Lulu that also draws you a card on the turn you play her, but also you could just have her stick out there for 2 or 3 turns and just draw. She doesn't always hit. It's not uncommon to sometimes hit like a Shiva with no forwards on field, or like an Arc when you're putting so many forwards. But like she hits about 50% of the time, and it's about good enough to be just worth running out there and taking a gamble on. 3 copies of Terra. It turns out that giving a EX burst to get back a summon is really good in Ice. Sid Randell, I think, is as strong as he's ever been. We're on 2 copies of him here. One unique thing about Sid Randell in this deck as well is, again, Chaos puts so much pressure on the field that it actually becomes really hard to remove the forward sitting next to him. And Sid Randell is maybe one of the best cards in the deck at doing that. 2 copies of Shantoto. This gives us back any of our forwards. We're not on any crystals, so she's just a cheap body that can kind of recur some of our other threats. 2 copies of Ishtola. This gives us a removal engine again to sit next to our Chaos. 3 copies of 4-cost Kurosame and 1 cost of 7-cost, or a copy of 7-cost Kurosame. The 4-cost one is generally better because you are going for a Chaos Arc game plan. Your opponent often doesn't have a lot of cards in hand for the 7-cost Kurosame anyway. However, having access to 7-cost Kurosame allows you to threaten it, which is really important. Means that against decks like Mono Water, the ability to just rip their entire hand, even 1 time, is enough for them, the Chaos and Arc, to maybe take over the game from there. One thing that I think people kind of don't give Ice enough credit for is I think the summons in Ice are actually pretty decent now. We're on 1 copy of the Buyback Shiva. This card just ends games towards the in the late game. Even if you discard it early, you can get it back with a Terra or a Len. And this kind of just prevents your opponent from doing anything for about 3 turns usually, once you're both to about 10 cards in deck. Really absurdly strong card, has a lot of utility, can also lock backups if you need to, can lock any forward. Just a really strong card in any mono ice deck. Three copies of Medius 12 Revenant Wings. This card doesn't seem like much. The text is really simple, but the more you play, the better this card really gets. The ability to just always be able to draw a card and cycle this is great, even if it is a relatively mediocre effect. But also just removing a dull forward of cost 3 or less is really good. That means that you can get rid of a card like a Yuna or a Porum that is causing you issues. Really good into a deck like Refia. Refia will oftentimes attempt to go into combat, and you can Medius a dull Refia before they get to do anything. Two copies of Zolaire, the Death Seraph. Honestly, this could have made an argument for being at three copies. It ends up being kind of a catch-all. It's really good into Unidecks, provided they don't have exactly Miwa in hand. You can kind of lock them in a situation where they can't dull more forwards to try to cancel the Zolaire without risking losing the forwards, but also it just pops their entire field. It's also, you're out against a Warriors deck. It turns out that just a lot of really good cards cost 2-5 or 2-3, 5, 7, or 11 in the format right now. Three copies of the Freecast Shiva. This card I think is maybe the most underplayed card in the entire game. There's a card in Yu-Gi-Oh! Called Upstart Goblin that is just a free draw. That's effectively what Shiva is once your opponent has any forwards in play and you're willing to cast an ice forward of your own. Which means we get to kind of play a 47-card deck, and Shiva even has kind of incidental upside. There's plenty of times where I'll hit it off of a Len, and it makes the Len completely free, which is always really fun. And then, of course, the three copies of Arc to go with the three copies of Chaos. Another new card from the set, Gimme Cat, is really good. It isn't a full replacement for Unalesca, like I thought it might be, but it does a really good job at kind of something that ends up happening with Chaos and Arc is your opponent gets to a low hand size and doesn't want to commit more to the field so that they don't get arced. Gimme Cat solves that problem by giving you repeatable discard outlet. And the action ability actually is very strong, the one that sacrifices itself to randomly discard a card. We're on, for our backups, one copy of Black Mage. I don't love this card. I usually want my backups to have more text, but something that happened a lot is you would open 2 or 3 dark cards, and you really want to find a backup off of Emina that doesn't cost another card in hand to play. And in those situations, Black Mage is a pretty good G-Leader impression, just without the draw. One copy of Arcanist. This is an FTK against some decks, and you can treat it as such. There are plenty of decks that just do not have a way of getting past this card without Tidusing it. It doesn't solve everything. It's not as broken as it used to be, but I think it's more than strong enough to be worth one copy of in the deck. One copy of Unalesca. This is her way of getting dead Chaoses out of the hand. I would say don't discard extra copies of Arc. Arc is almost always a live card, but there are definitely situations where turning value from your second Chaos in hand can be useful, and Unalesca is pretty much the only card that can take advantage of extra dark cards. One copy of Edward. This is another kind of just utility card. You'll notice we're not on the Xenos because we don't really need to be effective, but sometimes you get in a situation again where you have the Chaos, you get to do kind of a little bit, and you can hold up Edward to even make it where they can't go for cards in the break zone. 2 copies of Armor. This is to help us curve out. One copy of Mute. This is a way of guaranteeing access to our Sid Randels. The matchups where you need to get a turn 1 Sid Randell, you really need a turn 1 Sid Randell. One copy of Quistis. This is another copy of Emina in a way. Allows us to dig deeper for it. 3 copies of G-Leader as our standard unit backups that allow us to draw a card and have some incidental extra value if you get to enough backups. 1 copy of Azael. This allows us to more easily threaten again our Sid Randell or Kurosame in the matchups where it's good. Also can find Glenn in safer ones. And then the 1 copy of Tella as a way of recurring the best summon in our break zone on a burst. 3 copies of Emina round out the backups as a way of searching about half of the deck, honestly. Very, very strong card, obviously, and really coming into her own lately. In the LB, we're on 1 copy of Surges. You kind of just need an LB1, and you don't always want to go for Leela, so Surges ends up being the best one there in a lot of situations when you're either pushing for lethal or want to prevent something from attacking. 1 copy of Victoria for some early game removal. 1 copy of Little Leela. Against a mono water deck, you can't really commit to Chaos very easily. Leela is a way of getting a dark forward on the field so that you can then cast your arcs for 4 CP. 2 copies of Kuja. Plenty of games where you want to, again, protect your Chaos and maybe don't have time to go for a Kate Sith. Both Kujas end up being pretty useful in that situation. One copy of Shuyin. This allows you to search for your chaos. It's really powerful if your opponent has had to Shantoto you at any point. You can just pay 5 for the Shuyin, discard a card, go search the chaos, and then play the chaos for free. But also, it turns out that just getting access to chaos at any time from LB is a very powerful effect and worth building around. And lastly, the 2 copies of Kate Sith. This is as close as they're ever going to get to printing your opponent skips a turn, especially when you pair it with a card like Kurasame, or after Chaos Arcing them, they kind of just lose all of their resources when this happens. So without any further ado, let's jump into a game. I'm going to be using Untap, although I do recommend playing on Octagon. Untap just, I think, makes for a better spectator experience for this purpose. Our match is against Refia Control, which should be a pretty favorable match, but it's good to see this anyway. They're going to go Warrior Blight for a Bard, so we're going to reply with Edward. Edward is nice in the matchup, but not necessary. They're going to reply with a Tyro, doling the Bard, searching a Bosch, therefore they can get a follow-up play. We're going to go for some scaling here. We're going to go Mute. Sid Randall, not really great in this matchup. Unfortunately, we drew a Chaos. Really important to find the arcs, not necessarily the Chaoses so much. We fire Quistis here, trying to find an Alchemist. We don't find one, but we'll take this Toto anyway. Should be nice. They're going to reply with the Cryo, pick up the Kakullen, and we're going to go for a G deleter. We're going to go ahead and dull freeze that back up and sit with a nice 5 cards in hand, including a Chaos, or an Arc off the top. Looking good. Sarah FFL here going to get them access to a Warrior of Light. They don't really have a profitable second search here, and they're a bit afraid of me dull freezing backups and making the game awkward, so they elect to only search one off of the Sarah. I am, of course, completely fine with this. We're going to go for Emina, search a dead backup to make room for our Kurasame. We do a little bit of a double take here on whether we should pitch the Shantoto or the Len, but I decided to just leave it with the Shantoto. We dull freeze the backups, which forces out a Clive Ifrit. Bit of an interesting build of Chaos Arc, and this is the green light to go for Chaos. We're going to lead with Len just in case. There's not really any risk here, but... And there we go. There is the Arc on the Ifrit. I'm going to have to refresh the page because Untap is a rough program. Really nice for visuals, but not so nice to play. We do have the second Arc in hand. We're going to do it on the Castless Warrior of Light. They're going to ping the Len, and in response, we're going to remove an Arc from the game. I will proceed to forget about this later on. All the backups are dull frozen with one card in hand. Makes it perfect for Kate Sith. Just rip the whole hand. We're going to swing in with Chaos Dodge and EX Burst. Feeling pretty good here. And the opponent is going to just straight up Time Walk. We're going to go to combat. And we're going to kind of see what happens. They hit a burst off of the Arc, or both of them, which puts them to 4 cards in hand, which means that instead of going for the 4-cost Kurasame, we're going to go for the 7 and fully rip the hand. And off the top, 5 CP Arc. Wow. They're going to activate all the backups. We've forgotten about the Arc because we kind of tunneled on the Kurasame in hand. So they're going to search for a Refia and then play the Refia. At which point we're going to Kurasame special to kill the Refia before they go to combat. Losing us our Chaos. No real big deal. A little bit of a scuffle here where I forget whether I was supposed to... basically, my opponent here was wondering why I didn't Arc and was just playing around me arcing. And because I didn't, they kind of just like realized they were just not doing things properly. We're going to play this Len and go to combat, and Ishtola, really not what we're looking for. We're going to swing in, and of course it's another burst, this time a King Tycoon searching the Len out of the deck. We're going to Kate Sith. This is going to rip the card out of the hand. We have the ability to use the Edward to remove the Len from the game so she doesn't die, and kind of suspend something like the Slayer of the Death Seraph that we had previously. 4 damage here, 2 forwards. Really want to be pushing here. We're going to use this Medius 12 to Dole so we can get in for a bit more damage. Hit another burst. Goodness gracious. We're gonna lock the Tyro just to prevent like a Warrior of Light from coming down and buy back our Shiva. This card is so strong. It's not really worth running in multiples, but like the one copy feels so necessary. And thanks to the huge grip, they are going to go for a Lunafreya, trying to dig for any kind of action. Um, they're going to settle on Brynhildr. They have a dead Warrior of Light in hand, freezing the Tyro really mattering as it turns out. The double Brynhildr is going to draw them 2 cards, put them to 4 in hand. But we have a free cast Shiva. All we're going to do is a hop, skip, and a jump to leave. We're going to cast Shiva, we're going to buy it back, we're going to cast it again, buy it back again, and cast it one more time. And assuming there's nothing like the Leviathan in hand, this should be game. And it is. Opponent showing the hand, and they just do not have interaction, did not have a way of dealing with the Kate Sith on the field. So we're back with the deck, and let's do the pros and cons. So first, the pros. Number 1. It's never been a better time to be a mono deck in the game. So between the Emina, the G Deleters, the Armorers, the Black Mage, and the Kate Sith, mono ice is really, really, really good at kind of ramping out and doing what it wants to be doing. Number 2, the Chaos Arc gives you a really good game plan against aggro. Anytime your opponent goes for a Knight's Field and kind of dumps a bunch of forwards in play, you can just Chaos into an Arc and kind of reset the game kind of almost out of nowhere. It's really good at that. And 3, it's really fun. I think like Len again is such a fun card to play around. I do think she has a little bit of Zidane syndrome and that she can bait you into going for bad plays sometimes because you're like, well, I have a play I could go for, but Len can get me into a better play, so I'm going to go for Len, and then she flips like a dead backup. Like, that happens all the time. But, like, I'm not going to hold that against the card. Like, she is incredibly powerful and allows you to do a lot of plays with the Chaos, like, you play the Len first, then the Chaos, and then even if the Chaos is killed in response, you can double Arc still. Just really cool card. One of the most fun ones printed. And some of the cons. Chaos Arc is not everything against aggro. Like, it's really, really good, but sometimes your opponent can get into a really wide board state, in which case you really need Zalera to wipe the field. But it can be a little bit tricky to actually do so. Number 2, we really don't have a way of getting Arc in particular. There's not really a good, draw engine or ways to filter 5 for summons. Pretty much any hand opener that you find that has Arc and a playable backup, you end up kind of having to keep because the Chaos and the Leela are so accessible, but the Arc is so inaccessible. And 3, it is really pretty difficult to play. You often get into these game states where your opponent is top decking and you have to play around the top deck in a way that maybe they're not anticipating, but you can never rip them to no cards in hand permanently, and unlike something like Une, you can't just get infinite Arcs in this deck. We really only have the 2 Lens, the 3 Terras, the Tella if you haven't played all your backups yet, and like the Shantota to recur those. So you can run out of Arcs in a way that isn't really possible in like a traditional Earth Water Chaos Arc build. All in all, I think it's a really, really fun deck. I don't think it's like super top tier or anything. Like I would put it in like the bottom of tier 2 if I were tiering it. But I do think it's really fun, has a lot of legs, and I would not be surprised to see Mono Ice become a really dominant force, especially once we come around to 2-deck format, and a lot of these cards are going to go unused otherwise in decks. Thanks for watching, have a nice day, and I'll see you in the next one.